the absolute evil known as Abyss and Jinwoo, the warrior that would kill him. Abyss was disappointed thinking that this had been the last hero when, behind him, Jinwoo emerged and killed him with only one cut. But because of the damage received in battle, Jinwoo would also die. This will be the cliché story where the hero wins and then dies, becoming a legend. But that was unimportant to him. All the people had put their hopes in him and he was tired of carrying that weight, so he would die with Abyss and undo his fate. He would finally rest and be free of all his responsibilities. He closed his eyes. He would never have to hold a sword ever again. He started hearing some voices, and once he opened his eyes saw two people in front of him. Hearing those people talk and seeing himself made him conclude he had been reborn. Not only that, but also that he was the son of a swordsman, the Count Ipleta. His father prepared to give him the sword's bless. Since he was the youngest son of the best family of the empire, it was the common thing to receive this bless, but now everyone would put their hopes in him. What made him nervous because he had promised himself he would never use a sword again. Then, because of the blessing ritual, the sword started flying towards him and people got excited thinking Riley, which was his new name by the way, was showing a lot of interest in swords from an early age. Riley could only cry and curse himself for being reborn and not able to die again. 19 years had passed and now the Ipleta family was choosing a successor. The family was blessed by swords, the first master of the sword, Leon Finn, the swordsman who looked for the more pure essence of the power, and Louis Finn, the second master of the swift sword. Even though he was not as strong as Leon, he wasn't someone who could be beaten in terms of speed. Some men were discussing about how there also was a third son who seemed to be useless, lazy by nature. A servant of Riley who was listening jumped to defend him. What he didn't know is that while he defended him, Riley was in fact being lazy. Riley remembers how, when he was that same age in his past life, he got a sacred sword by accident that could avoid the destruction of the world by the Demon King, and how from that moment he stopped living thinking about him and only lived as a warrior. That's why in this life he planned to never wield a sword again. Meanwhile, Ian showed up. They talked about the lesson of the successor, but Riley makes it clear to him that he doesn't want to be a part of it and that he didn't care about those rumors about him being lazy because indeed, those weren't a lie. Now we're at dinner time, where Riley is talking with his mother about that same issue, but she only cared for the happiness of his son. Even so, Ian insisted that Riley was too smart as he started talking the fastest of all sons and with only old books of high level. The talk stops. Something was wrong. Riley's mother starts bleeding and falls to the ground, leaving him in shock. She had been poisoned. Riley, really angry, begins to sharpen his senses until he's able to hear a voice saying they had achieved their goals. Yes, the person that was behind the assassination attempt was the first wife of his father, Orly Finn Ipleta. Riley asks Ian to let him take care of his mother and to go find a doctor because he knew how to do an emergency treatment. And something else, he asks for his wood sword. After applying a treatment, they receive a consult with the doctor who confirmed the poison was making his mother's illness worse, but it wasn't toxic, so her life was not in danger at the moment. Ian and Riley discuss about how someone could have done it on purpose and debate about the information they had gathered so far. Even though they still have to investigate to discover the person behind it, Riley says that needs the sword because he's going to meet someone and leaves the place. He only wanted one thing in life, to live happy next to someone important to him, but someone had tried to take away that from him. He meets Orly, who greets him provocatively using his lazy tittle. The two of them have a very pointy talk and Riley says he perceives the same smell on her as the one of his mother's soup. She explains is because she had just returned from checking dinner and brings out how he was acting weird and that it was better for him not to try anything stupid. Then she left the place. Overnight, Orly was speaking with someone and mentions that Riley had started training after their talk but didn't even know how to hold a sword, making fun of him. And now we can see the other person she was talking to. It was an intruder who shouldn't be caught by Riley. But he had his doubts since he knew Riley was weak, but when he was watching him he couldn't stop feeling Riley was actually seeing him, like he was waiting for him. By orders of Orly, he leaves. While he sneaks through the halls of the nocturnal mansion, he runs into Riley, who tells him he's been waiting for him since they were on the training camp. Riley launches into an unbridled action, giving the intruder no opportunities and manages to make his dagger fly, while shows a little of the devil that is inside him. He finishes the business. Afterwards, Ian goes with Riley and tells him they found a body in the mansion who seemed to be a murderer. Even so, Riley seemed calm. After some things, Riley gives him a note of a medicine to heal her mother, so Ian went to prepare it while Riley needed to do something else first. He let us take a look at the hidden dagger in his room. Riley's father was discussing with his two first sons about how they weren't able to find anything. The spy had underestimated them getting into the mansion without any arms. In the meantime, Orly was writhed in anger but also more worried about the dagger the spy had in his room. At the next day, Riley was taking with Ian about the improvements of his mother's condition and asks him to give him a fruit of the trees, making Ian look up and noticed an object that was in the branches. He lowers it with a stone and realized it was a dagger, but most importantly, it had the same symbol as the empty sheath of the killer. At night on a carriage, a figure inside it and another one out of it were having a conversation talking about what happened in the mansion and how they couldn't find the body, so they would have to go themselves to take care of it, and in that way, their daughter wouldn't be in trouble anymore. Back to the mansion, Orly was too tense about what had happened and she couldn't do it anymore. But then someone knocks the door. It was Roy, her son, who had come to see how his mother was doing and to tell her that grandfather's industries had come to the city since that they'd been seen in town. To what Orly changes her countenance and relaxes, because now that her father was there, neither Riley nor his mother could survive. Resting in a tree with his heightened senses, Riley was listening to all of the intruders talk about the plans of that night. So then he interferes in their communications and tells them that he didn't care about what they were planning, only warns them not to bother him or get into the mansion. Out of it they could do whatever they wanted. The spies were very confused about that unknown voice but decide to end the matter anyway. So they start infiltrating and get into Riley's mother's room. When they begin to hear Riley's voice again, they turn around but there's no one there. They were looking to the wrong direction, because behind them Riley had showed up, prepared to kill them all. When they realize it was Riley, the intruders get too confident and one of them quickly goes behind Riley to kill him, but before he could do it he's pierced through the chest by Riley, who was using an arm tied with ropes. He uses it to kill him. The other spy thought the information about Riley was mistaken, but even so he throws himself at him. His hand had fallen. He planned to run away but Riley wouldn't let him. He had warned them this was their fault. This way another one fell. In a different place of the mansion, Ian and another servant were fighting with the intruders, but they never were a challenge for them. Ian's plan was to go find Riley to check he was okay, but while he was going a figure gets in his way, and when he noticed his strong presence decides to take it seriously this time and fight. The figure didn't seem to be a rival for Ian, but this one left an opening when launching an attack that was dodged by the figure, which plans to take advantage of it, but before it could do it, it's pierced by a dagger for one of his own, near its heart. Taking advantage of the confusion of the figure, Ian kills him and goes to find Riley. From behind, Riley was watching everything that happened. He was confused because he tried to pierce the figure in the heart but supposed the mistake was normal since his body was different than the one of his past life, and anyway, it was all over now. It was now time to be an innocent boy who didn't know anything again. Ian was looking for Riley and he finally finds him above a tree. He tells him everything that happened and that her mother was now safe, which relaxes Riley a lot. While they were directing to his mother, Riley tells to Ian that he found something weird and gives it to Ian for him to observe it. When he sees it with more details, he realized it was the recipe and list with directions of the poison Riley's mother had ingested. And also, he had found the guilty. In another place, an office that was destroyed, there were Riley's father and the figure that was fighting before with Ian, which wasn't die. The figure had accomplished its objective of getting the dagger back. Now he only needed time to run away. But still, Riley's father throws himself with no fear and they have a great combat where the figure was just dodging and blocking, making the swordsman mad. Meanwhile, Ian gets in the office, hectic, claiming he had found who had poisoned Iris, Riley's mother. With Orly by his side, the masked man stays in shock, doing nothing, and Ian gives the note to the Count, who while reading it starts getting angrier and angrier. The letter was his wife's, Orly. Riley was in his mother's room, who couldn't stop worrying about him, despite her state, giving us a sweet moment between mother and son. But then, Ian comes in and with pain, confesses who was the guilty of poisoning Iris, who refuses to believe it and get a huge discomfort since it was very painful for her to hear that notice. Riley asks about his father, to what Ian responds he's talking with Orly, but there was then a surprise guest. The figure decides to stop hiding its face, revealing that it was his father-in-law the whole time. Orly says that when her husband got a second wife she was very hurt, but the Count wouldn't let her fool him. He knew she didn't want him. It could have been enough for them to have the name of a prestigious family, but no, they had also decided to bring a group of killers to their home. The Count orders them to leave. Orly and her father leave the place undone, but at least her sons were safe since they hadn't been implied. As far as they could keep their industry, they wouldn't fall. They could start all over again. But there was someone there who wasn't willing to let them do it. They didn't understand what Riley was doing in that place, but he says he's there to continue his revenge. So Orly, very mad, tries to punch him, but Riley says to her that his father wouldn't stay still if he saw he was hurt. Orly's father responds he was very stupid, since no one had said anything about leaving him go back to the mansion. He was planning to take Riley as a hostage. Riley says he could let him go since he hadn't done anything. But it wasn't the same for Orly, who had tried to kill his mother and sent several murderers. Riley could dodge a dagger that was coming with great speed, surprising everyone. The spies threw themselves to kill him. While Riley is fighting them, he remembers the old times when he did the same in his past life, but it was now the moment to act in self-defense and kill all of them. which he managed to do with a simple sword swing. He didn't plan to live the same way this life. Orly's father was bathed in terror because of what a simple Riley's swing had caused, and it was just a wooden sword. Riley will give him a pity death. The poor man says it's okay for him to kill him but that he may, please, forgive his daughter. But Riley denies it with no hesitation and finishes his task. After that, he decides to go back home. At the mansion, we see Ian with the other servant very worried because they couldn't find Riley and they were scared he could have been taken as a hostage. When they planned to go find him, Riley's father appears, who had listened to everything. Just before something bad could happen, Riley appears, filling the servants with relief. His father asks him to follow him to his office. Once there, his father mentions he knows Riley discovered the paper with the poison's instructions to what Louis, his second brother, reproaches him that while his mother had been expelled he had been playing hide and seek and that for sure he made that evidence himself to accuse his mother. But their father interferes. The truth had already been proved and what he actually wanted to know is how Riley had found that paper. He tells them the day he was training he found the killer running against him and he defended himself as best as he could. Once he escaped he decided dejected and in his belongings, he found the paper. After listening it all, the father decides to finish the talk, not without telling Riley he'd like to talk to him again the next morning. Already outside of the room he meets his older brother but this doesn't speak to him so he leaves the place. Later, the two brothers were discussing what happened to their mother. Louis was ingenious and didn't believe what happened but Leon, wiser, recognizes his mother's crimes. But that was not the moment to give up yet. The successor hasn't been decided yet so they could still resolve their mother issue. Once Leon won the career to be the successor and was in charge of the Ipletta's name, everything will go back to normal. Then, we see a face that shows second intentions. When Riley goes talk to his father this goes right to the point and tells him to leave, leaving Riley in shock. Then he gives him a letter that is an invitation to a famous competition between swordsmen. Riley tries to deny it for a while, avoiding every single one of the answers of his father but, with no more options he asks him to, please, not force him to wield a sword. His father tells him he knew he could do it. But those words have an adverse effect on Riley. He starts remembering all the expectations everyone had on him in his past life and all the pressure evolved on that so he starts getting nervous. When he discovers Ian's behind the door listening everything, he took the opportunity to run. He ended up hiding in a closet, lamenting for the memories of his past life, questioning why he had been born in a swordsman's family and not only the family, even the servants were skilled with swords. While that he hears some voices outside, it was Sarah, one of the servants and his mother, who were talking about Riley's disappearance and the competition. Also about how it bothered Iris not having an heir but how she also was okay with that. The problem was that Riley sometimes had a sad expression. He would only say that everything is fine and pretend to be happy. So even if everyone had given up with him, she will still support him because she only wanted her son to be happy. After the talk the servant leaves and Iris takes the opportunity to go to the closet and talk to Riley. Being discovered, Riley comes out the closet and tells his mother the reason why he was hiding was his fear of the sword. Her mother offers him to go for a walk, as her mother he would help him. After a while Riley was analyzing things, Ian and Sarah would go as bodyguard to the trip. After Riley's father has a tender farewell with Iris and everyone is on the carriage, they leave for the journey. They would let Solalo alone, which was the name of the castle where they lived. Was named like that because of how close Iris's father was with it. We see there were different zones of Solia since it was a city of one kingdom because of how big it was. Also, they had something Riley had commented in some occasion, something called coke, a drink that tasted like heaven. Whoa.